Welcome to Just WannaQuilt, a research podcast coming out of Tulane University Law School, where we explore all kinds of things, stories about quilting, tools, field trips, maybe some famous quilters stop by, and, of course, a little bit of copyright thrown in just for fun. This is Elizabeth Townsend Guard, your host, and I'm a law professor at Tulane University Law School and a faculty fellow at the A.B. Friedman School of Business at Tulane. And I just want to quilt. Today we talk with Pam Heller. She is a AccuQuilt cutting expert, and AccuQuilt is one of our sponsors for our new inventory quilt project that starts October 15, 2019. So she came to talk to us and get to know us a little bit, and it was loads of fun. So we're going to go about a half an hour and talk about all things AccuQuilt, and I'm excited. I have lots of questions. I just finished a quilt using the glorified 9-patch, your new dye, which I totally
terrific.
I'm
terrific.
Completely obsessed. I want to make many quilts with it. So
we have a dye for that. When you're ready for it, we can help you.
It's no. I have your dye.
Oh, good.
Yeah,
good.
I purchased it because I wanted to. Anyway, so we'll talk more about that. And just all things. So we're going to start with a really easy question, which is what you already said, but we're going to ask you, tell me your name and where you're calling from.
You bet. I'm Pam Heller, calling from AccuQuilt headquarters in Omaha, Nebraska.
Very cool. And what's your first memory of someone sewing or quilting in your life?
I had a great grandmother who sewed with her sisters and my grandmother, and they made actually a hand-pieced grandmother's flower garden quilt. And when my great aunt died, that quilt came to me. And it was truly my inspiration for sewing. I had never quilted before. I didn't even know how to make a quilt. And I just knew that when I saw that was something I wanted to learn how to make.
That's really interesting. How old were you when that happened? Like around
I was 12.
You were 12?
I was 12 when my great-grandmother died, and then I was in college when my great-aunt died. And I went to the funeral, and my dad said, "Hey, I have a present for you." And I opened up this box, and there was that quilt. I cried ugly tears. It was great. Oh, my gosh.
Yeah, it gave me goosebumps. So you're 12, you have this beautiful quilt, and do you start learning how to do it, or sort of what's your quilt journey like?
Right. So I actually went to college, got married, and my husband is a physician, so we went through medical school and residency, and we have had 2 small children, and I really didn't have any time but to be a mom.
Yeah.
So when my husband was done with residency, we moved to a small town in Colorado, and my oldest son, Taylor, went to kindergarten, and my youngest son, Mason, went to preschool. And so for the first time in years, I actually had a little bit of time.
Yeah.
So I went to this local quilt shop in this tiny town in Colorado and said, "Hey, I can sew a 1/4-inch seam, make me a quilter." And they said, "Okay." So they got me all hooked up. They got me a rotary cutter and a ruler and a cutting mat, fabric and a pattern, and they got me in a class. And it was actually a 6-week class. And the pattern was it was kind of an odd kind of pattern to start with. It was a stack and wax pattern, which means the pattern came on a big sheet of paper, and you traced these geometric shapes that were just a little offset. They were a little wonky, so they weren't true rectangles or true squares. So you traced the pattern onto freezer paper, and then you cut out the freezer paper pattern, and then you stacked it on a stack of fabric, and very carefully, so that you didn't cut your thumb off, you would rotary cut around these pieces. And then when you sewed them all together, it didn't make this pretty little 6-inch block. It made this wonky block that you trim down again. So there were many, many times that I cut it wrong, or I sewed it wrong, or I had to redo a block.
Right.
And it was, And so after I made that quilt, I said it took 6 weeks, and it's done, and I still have it. And when I was done, I said to Ginger Nancy, who owned the store, I said, "Thank you for making me a quilter. I'm never going to quilt again." And they said, "Why?" And I said, "Because it took 6 weeks to make this little quilt."
Yeah.
And they said, no, there's a learning curve. And so I continued for the next 15 years until I joined the AccuQuilt team.
So interesting. So about what year were you first taking this class? Was it around?
Okay. So let's see. I can do this math in my head. 1998.
Yeah.
So 21 years ago.
Quilting in 1998 is a lot different than 2000. It's just a very different thing. That's when I was, I had done a little quilting when I was about 12, 13, but then did what you did. I went to a shop and asked them to teach me, and it's just the tools that we have now and how we approach it is just so different from 1998, I think. Do you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I look at the AccuQuilt system that can cut 90% faster than with rotary cutters or scissors.
Yeah.
And every time it's going to be accurate. So what used to take you an hour to cut out, you can literally cut out in 5 or 6 minutes.
Yeah, it's kind of remarkable. I mean, you all sent we were very careful about because of the FTC. So you all, we asked, and you all sent us systems to try, which was insanely great. And then we bought a few other dies on our own to experience. And I'm a really regular average quilter. I'm not great at, I'm really good at copyright, but I'm an okay quilter. And it was kind of amazing to see, I wasn't sold on, I wasn't pushing for the AccuQuilt, but it changed my whole feeling about quilting, which was kind of weird and really fast that it happened. Because I knew that my problems weren't with cutting anymore. I may still have problems, but they weren't cutting problems.
Well, and for me, that same thing happened because I realized I've been cutting with a rotary cutter and a ruler and cutting wrong and taking so long.
Yeah.
And ironically, so the pattern that my quilt it's grandmother's flower garden. So you need, 87,000 hexagons, just a ton of hexagons.
Right.
And so what I had done was, in the non-AccuQuilt world, to cut a hexagon, you have to cut a strip, and then you cut a rectangle, and then you take a 1/4-inch ruler, and you trim all the way around the edge to make one hexagon. Mm-hmm. And so for about, 10 years, I worked on that on not really a regular basis, but I only made 7 flowers because it was so time consuming to cut all those hexagons. So my first week at AccuQuilt, I discovered we had a hexagon die, grandmother's flower garden. So I cut all the pieces for my quilt and all the centers and all the papers in about 2 hours.
That's amazing.
So now as I travel, I take those little things together because it's hand piecing. Yeah. So I can do it on airplanes and I can do it in hotels. And in the last 5 years, I've made 40.
That's amazing.
Compared to, 5 and 10.
It does really change the game, I have to say, because what it does is it shifts your time. And I'm doing this really big project on the concept of time on my academic side. And I kind of was amazed at sort of what it did, because when you quilt, a good portion of your time is cutting. And it took that out of it. So it suddenly was like, oh, wait, I can make 5 glorified 9 patches and make a baby quilt really fast, right? And it wasn't about speed. It isn't like, oh, I need to get this done. But my time is not being spent cutting. And I think that cutting is not a very exciting part of quilting. So
it's not. And that's the place where if you make a mistake, that's where you're going to make it.
Yeah.
So not only is it saving you time cutting it the first time, but with rotary cutters, you're cutting it again and again because you've cut it incorrectly.
Yeah. So, I mean, we are just a regular podcast where this is not you aren't. Yeah, there's no you haven't paid me to say any of this, but there was a moment when you sent stuff that it was so much fun to cut stuff that I was cutting stuff with no reason to do it. It was I want to cut more of these things. It was just the process of cutting was so satisfying that I was like, okay, now I have a lot of weird blocks that I don't know what to do with, but I'm really happy.
Now you have your stash and it's all cut.
Exactly.
Well, it's funny that you say that. I have a 5-year-old granddaughter, Oakley, and her favorite thing to do is come to my sewing room and cut stuff.
Yeah.
We'll take scraps, and she knows how to find lengthwise green, and we put it on a die, and she can run it through the cutter.
Yeah.
And she loves it.
Yeah.
And so it's wonderful that when you were thinking about it, you were thinking, oh my gosh, I can cut up other things besides, the pieces for the glorified 9-patch.
And I think that's what's so nice about it, again, like this is just my experience with it, is I do like the idea that a 5-year-old, you could work with your kid or your grandkid or a neighbor's kid, and they can use it and it's safe. And I find that super great too, because the rotary cutter is such a dangerous thing that it's really nice to have that as an alternative,
Yes.
So I'm a convert. I'm totally a convert. I'm like,
Terrific.
I worship at the House of AccuQuilt. It's really weird. I did not expect that. I did not expect it at all. Okay. So I have a couple of questions for you. So we're going to talk a little bit about the dies themselves, a little bit about the history, and then I want to sort of understand sort of the strategy of the company in terms of social media and other things. So that's kind of so tell me a little bit about, let's do the practical. So let's say someone's listening and they go to your website and there's so many dies. It's really overwhelming. What do you say to them, and how do we understand how to start? Because you're kind of building your own AccuQuilt stash in some way, right? But it's got to be over time because there is a cost to it. So tell me what your thoughts are about that part of it.
Absolutely. So, it's funny. We addressed this dilemma about 4 years ago because we actually have over 250 dies.
Wow.
So some of our customers maybe own 2 or 3. They had made some projects, and then there was kind of this dilemma of what should I do next? So at AccuQuilt, we address that issue by creating what we call the cube. So the cube are 8 geometric dies. They come in 5 different sizes: a 6-inch finished block, an 8-inch finished block, a 9-inch finished block, a 10-inch finished block, and a 12-inch finished block.
Now, let me ask you, I'm going to interrupt you there. So that was the first question I had, was how do you choose which cube? Because I know you guys sent me 8-inch. Well, I think you sent me 8-inch. So, what's the strategy behind that?
So the strategy is, well, first of all, each of those geometric shapes have that 1/4-inch seam allowance built in, okay? And the cube system is based on a 4-patch. So shape number 1 in every cube is a square. 4 of them sewn together make a finished block. If you're using the 8-inch cube, it's the 8-inch block. So we at AccuQuilt bundled, we made what we call the Ready, Set, Go, that has our manual machine, an 8-inch cube, 2.5-inch strip die, cutting mat, and this great book by Eleanor Burns.
Yeah.
So we chose for you the 8-inch cube. And the reason we chose the 8-inch cube is because all those numbers are even.
Got it.
So you're going to finish to a 4-inch or a 2-inch. It works well with the 2.5-inch strip die because those finish at 2 inches. So I would tell you that 8-inch is probably our most popular die or cube.
Yeah.
And that's why we put it as part of the Ready, Set, Go.
Interesting.
So, and then with that cube, we gave you 72 mix and match patterns, and those are free downloadable patterns. And the great thing about that is some of the patterns are beginner patterns. Some are intermediate, some are advanced, because our customers come in all different levels of skill level when it comes to quilting.
Yeah.
So if you are new to our system, I would tell you to look at the Ready, Set, Go package. It has a manual machine, that cube, a 2.5-inch strip die, and a cutting mat.
Yeah.
And the great thing about the cube system is that you don't have to use our 72 mix and match patterns. You can make stuff up in your head.
Yeah.
You can say, oh, I want to create just half square triangles. Go for it. I mean, we tell our customers, there's no die police. Nobody's going to come to your house and
there's
say,
no die police.
are you using the dies exactly how we intended them? Yeah.
That's right. And I think
and with our dies,
to understanding what you have, because you have a lot of different shapes in that cube thing. So that's pretty interesting. Now, how does it relate to? It doesn't relate. So we've been talking to people. We also got the EQ software and block based and all these other things. So if you're in one of these software programs and you set it to an 8-inch block, you will likely have a lot of the pieces for. I mean, what do you think? What is your relation? I mean, I don't think you have an official relationship, but how do you use the software with something like the AccuQuilt?
Correct. Okay, so that's a great question. We actually teach a class called There's a Die for That, and we talk about pattern conversions. So if you're using a program, what you want to look at is, hey, what shapes does it cut? Does it cut squares and half square triangles and rectangles? Well, all of those shapes are included in your cube. Right. So you could adjust your pattern depending on what size cube you own. Yeah. So if you own an 8-inch cube, you could make an 8-inch block, a 12-inch cube, a 12-inch block. And so when you're looking at pattern conversions, we chose those 8 popular shapes that are in most patterns.
Very cool. And, talking about that, one of the things, this is a project based in intellectual property and sort of understanding the role of law and creativity, and we'll get to that. But it really does show you, and that's part of the journey was your new die, the glorified 9 patch that you had referenced history. So I looked back at it and then was sort of tracing sort of when is something copyrightable and when isn't. And what you just said is that these are like the basic shapes, and that you're taking these basic shapes and putting them into other things that we are very standard. And it's only when you get to that third level of your own selection, arrangement, or coordination of these basic blocks into a quilt that copyright comes into play. So I found it really interesting to sort of see literally the building blocks. That's what you're providing with AccuQuilt, are the building blocks to create these public domain blocks, which then create a copyrighted
Correct.
quilt. Yeah,
and
cool.
I love that you chose glorified 9 patch, because that's one of the few patterns that we can actually go back and trace. There was a column writer in Chicago who took her 9 patch and added it and created that melon shape.
Yes,
and so when we talk about the glorified 9 patch, we talk about the history of that and how there was very few of our patterns can you trace that history back.
Yeah.
And then we made it so easy because with that melon shape, we added notches.
You did add notches. I love the notches,
you're welcome,
I have to
by
say.
The way.
Yes, I love the notches. And that was really, wasn't that an Eleanor Burns? I mean, she really did that as well. She had done, that's one of her sort of signature things, right? So it was really kind of cool to have, what she did now in an AccuQuilt die. Is that right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
Very cool.
Yes. And those notches work perfectly because you're cutting on the lengthwise grain. So those curves are cut on the bias.
Yeah.
So that way you're able to just bend them enough to make those perfect curves.
Yeah, it's been really fun. I mean, right now I'm really focused on curves, and so I think it's been, it felt very doable and that you could feel good about yourself when it finished. And I think that's really important with quilting, and I think that that's what AccuQuilt helps you to feel a little bit better, that you're not struggling as much.
I agree. Yeah. And we break it down so easily. And on the die, you'll notice that we separated the pieces on the die.
Yeah.
So the curves are in one section and the squares, so that you know where you can lay your fabric and what pieces you need to cut. And it's just and we screen printed the letters so that you can coordinate the pattern with, here's my die, here's shape A, here's shape B, and so forth.
Yeah, it's very interesting, isn't it? And I have my law students working with me and doing it, and they're handling it, and they don't quilt at all. They're law students, and they quilt when they come to my class, and they're handling it just fine. So it's really great.
We would love to see pictures of those law students sewing.
Yes. Sometimes we have events. We bring, we call ourselves a quilting army. So we bring some of the members of the quilting army that are local in, and they help teach the law students, and they have to quilt. They have to sew for food. So it's a lunch thing. So they come and they sew for food. It. And you get the most amazing group of people who for lunch is really, I think in some way it also makes them, they're kind of curious, but they're like, well, I'm just here because I want the food. So
I hope you have T-shirts that say "We'll sew for food."
We'll sew for food. That's a great idea. So it's a fun event. Okay, so tell me a little bit about the history of AccuQuilt, sort of where it comes from, and sort of all of that.
So about 27 years ago, Steve Nabity, who is our CEO, had created a die in a base, but he didn't really know how to cut with it. And his wife was a school teacher, and it was Halloween time, and she took some cookie dough and rolled it out onto the counter with a rolling pin, and then took an old-fashioned pumpkin metal cookie cutter and cut out pumpkin shapes. And as Steve watched his wife cut out the pumpkin shapes, he thought, I wonder if I put paper on the top of this die and run Lynette's rolling pin over the top, would it cut? And it did. And AccuQuilt was born. So AccuQuilt is our sister company, the same concept of dies and machines, only for paper. So schools, churches, libraries use our AccuQuilt system. So then about 12 years ago, Steve took that AccuQuilt machine to Quilt Festival in Houston. And he told quilters, hey, listen, we can cut fabric with this machine, and it's going to be so great. But what he learned was, even though it did cut fabric as promised, quilters have a whole different mindset. They want to be able to cut multiple layers of fabric. Right. They want you to cut out the dog ears. They want you to have those 1/4-inch seam allowance built in, everything. So Steve, who has a master's degree in engineering, came back, redesigned the machine, redesigned the dies, and AccuQuilt was born about 11 years ago.
Interesting.
And kind of a fun note, AccuQuilt, the very first shape was a pumpkin shape in homage to his wife, Lynette.
That's very sweet. I like that. That's very sweet. And did it stay a family-owned business? Is it still owned by them? Or
it does. It is. He's here, and he's a complete knucklehead, and we love him.
Oh, that's really cool.
Yes, he's been active in the company since its inception.
So amazing how many quilt companies are family-owned. Are you amazed at that too?
Often.
Yeah.
And it's interesting as I travel, because I'm an international traveler or educator. So I travel all over the United States and Canada going to quilt shops and doing events with retailers that carry our product. Mm-hmm. And I'm amazed that probably 90% of those quilt shops are family owned.
It's amazing, isn't it? It's really amazing.
Yeah, it's a great way to kind of pass that knowledge and that passion onto your next generation.
Yeah, it is remarkable. And it's got some of the flavor of history. I mean, I think about the early 20s, 30s, 1920s and 30s where you get all those people who are making patterns, and then I don't know, it's just, there's some parts that are bigger companies, but it's just really interesting.
Right.
It's very different, I think, than other. Maybe all spaces are like this, but I think it's very interesting. All right, so tell me a little bit about the intellectual property behind this. So obviously, you're not protecting the shapes because shapes aren't protectable. But is there technology, and I would imagine, I think I know the answer, but I'm going to pretend like I don't, that you've probably done the trademark on AccuQuilt. And
we do.
Right. So tell me about how you protect it and what's protectable of the stuff that you do.
Well, all of our dies come under our AccuQuilt as a whole has, we're protected by trademarks.
Yeah. And
patterns that we create ourselves also fall under that
copyright,
trademark protection. And then our dies as well. But keep in mind that those dies are just basic geometric shapes, right?
And so I would guess that
you can't own a square. Nobody can own a square.
Right. So paper pieces can't own a square. You guys can't own a square. Squares are available for everybody. And you can see why. If people are listening, you wouldn't want to get permission from AccuQuilt to make a square. And that's what would happen if they owned a square.
Correct.
I also think there's probably trade dress on the green that you use for the dies, that you're consistent on that, so that when you see that die from across the room, you know it's an AccuQuilt die. Is that right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Right. And our system obviously is trademarked.
Yeah.
And so, the cutting system and our cutters. Yeah. But as far as any other of those things, I wouldn't know the details of that.
That's good. I mean, so tell me a little bit about your relationship between you and other cutting systems. So there's a couple of other cutting systems out there. Do you all do you feel super competitive? Sometimes they have I think one of them has a way so that you can use AccuQuilt dies on their system. There's people who make dies. So tell me about your relationship with third parties.
So as far as that is, so AccuQuilt is the leader in the industry as far as this die cutting system for quilters.
Yeah.
And we recognize that our competitors have dies that they can use our dies in their machines. We can't use their dyes in our machines. It voids the warranty.
Oh, interesting.
And so I don't think that there is a competition per se, other than when we do education to our customers, we talk about the Go system and our Go dyes and how we want to create patterns using our Go system.
Yeah.
I don't really see that there's that competition. There's not, I don't get questions a lot that say, hey, Pam, I have this other system. What can I do with it?
Yeah. Interesting. And what's the life of a dye? So let's say I use the glorified name patch like a maniac. What should I expect in terms of the life of it?
So that's a great question. So you're going to get thousands of cuts out of that dye. Those blades never need sharpening. What's going to wear out is that cutting mat.
Yeah.
So when you use it, you want to flip it and turn it and flip it and turn it. And you're going to get hundreds of cuts out of that cutting mat.
That's interesting.
So one of the great advantages to the Go system is once you have a dye, you're going to have it forever.
Yeah.
Because you're going to add to your collection and you're going to reuse them. I have worked for AccuQuilt for 7.5 years, and we just recently replaced 2 dyes that we demo with every single day.
Wow, that's really amazing.
Twice a day.
So it's a good investment.
Right, absolutely, that great investment. And you know what? We're quilters. We're a quilting family, and we sell cutters and dyes.
Yeah.
Our educators that travel, they know about our product, but they're quilters and they have that passion.
Yeah.
I try to tell our educators that we're there to educate and motivate and demonstrate.
Yeah.
So let's show them how to cut with the system correctly. Let's get them all excited about how to use the system. And then let's let your imagination go wild. What do you want to create with the Go system?
Okay, so I have to do a follow-up. Is there anything that you can tell us over audio about making sure that we understand cutting correctly? I imagine that's
you bet.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about that.
Correct. So you'll notice that our dyes, the shape on our dyes are set at a little bit of an angle. They're a little bit offset. Mm-hmm. And the reason for that is because inside our cutters are steel rollers, and inside the die where that two-tone foam is, those are where the steel blades are located. So if that shape was straight on the die board, every time that steel blade would hit that steel roller, you'd get kind of this jarring effect, like you hit a speed bump with both wheels. You get that jarring effect. But what happens when you take that speed bump one wheel at a time?
Got it.
So much smoother and easier. So we tell quilters you can cut up to 6 layers of quilting cotton in one pass, but you can cut flannel and felt and denim and wool and batting. Just start with 1 or 2 of those layers. You want to have that label, which is on the side of the die towards your belly, and the lengthwise grain of the fabric traveling back and forth through the cutter. The reason is that lengthwise grain is really tight, and you're going to get a good clean cut. But here's the trick. You want to line up your fabric just barely covering that shape. Don't line it up with the die board or you're going to waste fabric.
Yeah.
You just want to line it up barely over that shape, run it through the cutter. So this is like the ultimate stash busting tool.
Yeah.
Because quilters go home to their stash and it's so overwhelming. At our site, on our website, we have hundreds of free patterns.
Yeah.
So you can go in, choose your die, download patterns, and start making quilts, which is
cool.
Really, as a quilter, what we want to do, right? We don't want to just sit around and cut stuff.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's really interesting. What about cleaning the die when it gets like the schmutz on it? What do you...
Great word.
Yeah.
So what you're going to do is the best way to clean it is with a lint roller brush.
Oh.
So just take your lint roller brush and run it over the top. And then every cutter includes a die pick.
Yes,
so
that poking thing. The poking thing.
Yes, did you figure out how to use it?
Yeah, well, a friend, Joel, who's over, she helped me learn it, but I also love it for moving the fabric through the machine. I think that it's just like this perfect, I don't know if you're supposed to use it for that, but I think it's been really great. So, right. So you just...
So sometimes where those half square triangles meet together, threads build up in there, and so you just want to take that die pick and go towards the blades, not towards the foam, towards the blades and pick out those threads.
Okay.
And then that's all you have to do. And when you store your dies, you want to stack them like books on a shelf.
You do.
You don't want to stack them one on top of each other The weight of the dies on top will damage the blades of the dies on bottom.
Got it. What about the big long ones? Like we have a bunch of long ones.
Yeah, just stack them like a book. Turn them on their sides. Those strip dies, just turn them on their sides.
Got it. All right. And then the other like very practical question I have for you is the 1/4-inch seam. So I've been doing the glorified 9 patch, and I'm going back and forth on like, do you say like a true 1/4-inch seam or a scant 1/4-inch seam with these dies?
I'm going to tell you a true 1/4-inch seam. We build those dies so they are a true 1/4-inch seam. So make sure that when have your 1/4-inch foot on your sewing machine, that you're coming right to that edge.
Yeah.
And I'm going to tell you also the difference sometimes in our projects is whether you've pressed your seams to the dark side or pressed your seams open.
Right. What is your suggestion on that?
So if it has multiple shapes like the glorified 9 patch, I'm going to tell you to press those seams open.
Yeah. Yeah, I saw a difference. I did it every way imaginable, and I saw the difference when it was open versus sideways.
If I'm making flying geese, I'm going to press away, from the 1/4 square triangle.
Yeah.
I'm going to press away because then that's the way that works the best. But for example, we just released the new die Storm at Sea, and for sure you want to press those seams open. Otherwise you get so much bulk.
So much bulk you can't deal with it. Yeah, that's so interesting. Well, now how do you feel about the patterns that you have out for free? A lot of them are on traditional blocks. How protective are you as a company? Like, you're not registering those at the Copyright Office or anything? Like, you don't, they're pretty standard patterns.
Yeah.
You're just teaching people how to make them, right? It's the convenience of it and helping them imagine how to do stuff. Is that right?
Correct. It's all about the education.
Yeah.
Here's this pattern. It's a real common pattern. Maybe your Aunt Susie made a pattern like this.
Yeah.
We're going to show you how to cut it with our dies and sew it together easily.
This is so great. All right, so on our side of it, the next thing we're doing is this inventory project, which we've already started, but we haven't officially started. There's no official start because everyone's starting to make them. So it came from this woman on Instagram, Jessica Quilter? I always get it wrong. Jessica Quilter, who took a little bit from each of her and made hexagons. And it's just gorgeous, right? And so I made one that was 3-inch squares before we got the machine. And now we're just doing inventory quilts. So we'll use the dies, and we're going to just keep doing this throughout the year because to see how we do it. So I just did one that's again, Joel was over, so she brought her circle dies, and we cut out circles for every Tula Pink fabric I have. So it's an inventory of Tula Pink fabric. Oh my gosh. And we're putting it on.
Exciting.
Yeah. So the idea is okay, next one is all the red fabrics. For me at least, I want to use my stash in creative ways that aren't scrappy, but sort of really get to see all the fabric all the time. So that's our project. That's what we're doing with the AccuQuilt. And then having others do it as well, and then those that are here that don't have it can come to the house and use ours that you send, and sort of to give them an experience of it so that they can sort of see what it's like, and that's kind of what we're doing at this point. So I wanted to know if there's any tips or thoughts about it. Yeah. So do Instagram and all the things, social media as we get going. So and Willow Olson is leading that for us. So I'm pretty psyched about that. Yeah.
Good. Now, we on our social media side, we actually have Facebook Live that I do.
Oh, how cool.
And for example, Wednesday we're going to do hexagons and Y seams.
I love
and
it.
So what we do is we ask our customers, hey, kind of what are your pain points or what do you want to know about? Is there something fun you want to do?
Yeah.
And so then we create our Facebook Live. And it's really had a great response because for example, we taught them how to cut strips and then to turn those strips at 90 degrees and 60 degrees to make squares and diamonds. And so as our company, we really are here to educate our customers.
Yeah.
We recognize that once they know how to use their die and the multiple uses of their die, then it's just a win-win for everybody.
Well, I think what would be great is to know when you're doing those so that we can alert the Quilting Army and try what you're doing, because I'm really about experiment. And so I think that would be insanely awesome.
So it's this Wednesday at 12 noon Central Time.
Okay.
And then starting October, they are every Wednesday at 12 noon Central Time.
Oh, that's so cool. Okay,
and
we'll put that up.
Yeah, and it's and we always record them to our Facebook page. Okay, so if they miss one, they can come back. Awesome. But we're going to give total props to the Quilting Army this week and talk about how great they are.
Cool.
So,
awesome.
Which is kind of fun. And so I travel quite a bit, and so sometimes I'm going to miss those Facebook Lives. But we have guests that come in and do fun things. And so, again, it's just all about education and how to use your die, and don't be scared.
Totally. I think it's just amazing. So, So I mean, I think that's super great. I still I have one question. I already asked someone else, but I want to ask you, on the Glorified 9 patch, is the goal to have a little teeny tiny strip all the way out, or to have a little bit of the background fabric at the end? Like, how far out is, I mean, I'm just still struggling with that part.
Okay, so when you sew those two melon shapes together and you press the seam away, you should have 1/4 of an inch of background fabric just hanging out.
Yeah.
Because when you sew them together, then you're going to put that 1/4 inch seam there, and those points are going to be perfect on the edge.
I think that's what I found finally. It's funny. There was a lot of struggle that was not necessary. I think if I had just used the 1/4 inch, because, I put it up, and then everyone was like, well, should you try this? I was like, oh, go to 100 weight thread. I think everybody had all the ideas, and I totally tried them. And then when I went back to the 1/4 inch, and I just did it and trusted it, it was fine. So I think there's a lot of nervousness for no good reason. So
Right. Well, and it's funny that you say that, because I tell quilters that when they get a new die, a couple of things. First, go to YouTube or to our website and watch the video we created for that die. Yeah. Every time we release the die, I sew a block together and talk about it. And then take some fabric you don't love and make a test block.
Yeah.
Because then you're not using your beautiful Tula Pink fabric and having to stitch out the pieces, or tear out the pieces or whatever.
Yeah, well, I did test blocks, and I did like 5 of them in the same fabric. And so then I just put it into a baby quilt, because it was like, just put fabric on each side of it. So my test blocks are now going off to a baby. So
good girl. Way to use those.
Exactly. Well, this is so fabulous. I can't tell you. I'm not this exuberant about projects, but I really do feel like I think I could get better. And I think that if you take the cutting equation out, now it's just about like being better at sewing, and that's really awesome. So I feel like I've moved forward in a really positive way.
There you go.
Yeah.
There you go.
Awesome. This has been super great. Can you, is it okay to air it? Do you need to review it before we post it?
No, our social media people are sitting right here with me, and they say it's good to go. You can air it whenever you want.
Oh, yes.
If you would just let us know when you're going to air it, we'll promote it on our site as well.
Fabulous. I love it. Yes, I love it. Okay, cool. So hold on just a second. I'm just going to turn the recording off.
Okay.
So you've been listening to Just Wanna Quilt, a research podcast coming out of Tulane University Law School. And I'm Elizabeth Townsend Gard. If you like this podcast, keep listening. Also, we have a Facebook group. Come join us. We talk about a lot of things. We also have an Instagram account. And of course, most importantly, I really hope you get a chance to quilt today.